Well, I could not be more honored or pleased to introduce Journey Ruth listeners to you, Marian Sorci. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I'm excited.
So Marian and I, God intertwined our lives through a mutual friend who asked if we would teach a young mom's Bible study together. And yes, and that was the beginning of our friendship.
It was. But we had, just before that, the reason we even knew each other and why Maggie got this idea, I guess, was because Maggie and I were leading a Bible study and you were in it.
That's true. Mm-hmm. That's true. Yep. And so then Marian and I went on to teach, I don't know, 2 years?
2 or 3 years. Yeah,
2 or 3 years. Had other ladies come in and join us. And then COVID hit.
Yeah. I wish you and I were still doing something like that. It was very... I liked it.
I did too. I was like, maybe we'll have to talk about that.
Yes.
But and then Marian's husband and my husband have a lot of things in common.
They do.
So they can come over for dinner and Marian and I will talk, and Lou and Jeff can go
to talk about.
Yes, exactly. So, well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, when I previewed that question, I thought, well, I just turned 76. That's a really big number. So where do you want me to start?
Well,
no, I
Cliff
could go
Notes
ahead.
version.
Yeah. So I am married to Lou, and he's retired, and so am I. So we just have nothing but time on our hands, right?
And you guys use that time very well.
Do we?
Oh.
Well, we try.
I mean, you guys go up to what?
Colorado.
Up in Colorado for
4 months or more every summer and get out of the heat, which is really, we're blessed to do that. We have some property up there and we have a fifth wheel. And so, yes, we do that. And my son and daughter-in-law live there, and my grandson did, but he just got married last May. And he's in the Marines, and now he's down in Yuma.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes. So married, this is a second marriage for Lou and me. So we came to this each with 2 children. And so I have my son, who's 51. I thought that was about my age, but I guess not. And I have a daughter who is 45, which I really can't even comprehend. And she has severe cerebral palsy and is a totally dependent person for all of her needs, personal needs, etc. She does live here in the Valley, and she lived with us until she was 22, and she booted us out of the house and invited her girlfriend to live with her. And we have a staff of about 9 women that come in on shift work that help them live as independently as possible. And then Lou has 2 children who are in their 40s, and he has a son who I think is about to announce a marriage coming up or something like that. And
should you say that on the podcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a daughter who's in her late 30s who has 2 lovely young women who are my step granddaughters. Cool. And they all live here in the Valley, which is nice. However, they live over in East Tempe, so they might as well. I think I see my son in Colorado more than I see them. But
isn't that funny? It usually happens that way.
I know. I know. Because, well, they're working and the girls are in school, so you go and it's during the traffic hour, and after you've traveled an hour to get there, about all we do is take them out to eat and wave goodbye and come home. Yeah, it's not a place that we can drop in, and we're so far away they don't get to drop in, unfortunately. So anyway, but that's that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I've done a lot of things as far as working goes, but now I am retired, and I do a lot of several things, not as much as I used to at our church. I sing in the choir, which is probably my favorite thing that I do. And I facilitate grief share And my hobbies include quilting
Yes.
and reading. I love to read.
Yes.
I like to think.
She's like one of those that will like consume an entire book in a night.
Well, sometimes I've been known to do that.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I like to think of myself as a gardener, but if I'm really truthful with myself, it's mostly a fantasy. I mean, I do plant things, vegetables and stuff. I like to do that. And right now I do have some things growing in my yard, which I'm hoping to be able to harvest before I leave to go to Colorado in the spring.
There you go.
So
I was going to say, so is that like you actually get vegetables off of them, not just a plant?
yes, I have several peppers, like green peppers, bell peppers, or
Yes.
other colored peppers. And I have some beautiful tomato plants with blossoms on them. And I have some broccoli plants they should be producing because they are beautiful green with huge leaves and they're growing like wildfire. So
I think there's a reason why Arizonans eat a lot of salsa, and that's because we can easily grow peppers and tomatoes.
and cilantro.
And
I like to
cilantro,
grow
yeah.
herbs. Yes. And I have one artichoke plant presently.
Oh, there you go. So yes, I think those Southwest flavors, there's a reason
Yes.
why we like them. Well, when you and I spoke, you and I have talked a lot. Marian is a person that I go to for advice when I need help with something. In fact, one time we went out to lunch and I sat down with her and I said, okay, this isn't just a social call. She was like, oh, really? I was like, not today. I was like, I need you to tell me if I need to go get counseling or not. And she was like, oh, this should be good. And so I go to Marian a lot for that type of wisdom. But you and Marian swears that she has nothing to say. And I said, fine, I'll just follow you around for a couple of days with a book and just write down the things that I think are important that you say. And maybe I can prove you wrong. Still haven't done that. But she does lead Grief Share. And you mentioned that at our church. So can you tell me, what is Grief Share?
Well, it's an international organization that was born in around 1998. And it sort of came out of another ministry called Divorce Care. But this, and divorce, there's a lot of grief in divorce.
Yeah.
But this focuses on the death of somebody as opposed to all the other reasons we might grieve. So Grief Share started, and again, you can, it has groups meeting around the world. And it is to help people navigate that journey of grief.
Yeah.
And so it meets for 13 weeks, and each week is a topic, and they all kind of build on each other, but you can drop in any time, and each one is kind of a separate topic that you could gain something from. So, and oftentimes that's what happens, or people can come for a few times or whatever. And so it's just a way to, one, you're meeting with other people who are experiencing what you are. And there's great comfort in that. Because sometimes those that aren't experiencing what we are, they see us in pain. They don't want that to be the case. And so they try to, well, sometimes they say really dumb things like, that happened a year ago.
Right.
You need to get over it. But you were married to that man for 68 years and you don't get over that there is no time frame on grief as to when you should do what. But with this group of people, they're all kind of coming from that same mindset. So there's comfort in that. It's set up. You don't have to even say your name if you don't want to. But you will find, once you become a little more comfortable meeting, that while there's a lot of great information on the videos and in the book, you gain a lot of insight and get a lot of help, and give a lot of help by sharing and listening to other people.
Yeah.
You can kind of see the light bulbs go off in people's brains as they go, wow, that's just how I feel. I guess I'm not crazy. Or
That's
from
what my dad said when he
another
went through
planet.
it.
Yeah.
He said it gave him permission to not think. He goes, I literally thought I was going crazy.
Yes.
And then I realized it was grief.
Yes. And you hear that from a lot of people. And it suggests that you keep a journal, because if you have a chance to look back, are you a journaler?
Aspiring?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
I have about 100 journals. But I
Yeah.
write in the first few pages, and then my first sentence is, this time I'm going to do this. But a week goes by, and then a year goes by, and I haven't done anything since the first week. And
That sounds familiar.
when you decide to do it again, don't you need a new journal with clean pages?
That's right. Because you don't want to see your failure at the beginning.
And I want my writing to be perfect. I don't want any words scratched out.
Right.
But that's really not the way to do a journal of any kind. But it is helpful. And even if we just kept one for daily living, to look back and go, wow, that's where I was a year ago.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like I have made no progress in this grief journey. But now that I look back and read this, I see I have truly come a long ways.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get into any more stuff right now. But so then we watch the video. And then after that, the facilitator, who's me in this case, I will try to ask questions that don't have just yes and no answers. That, if you were to have a take home from the video, what would that be on this one tonight? And you have to be comfortable with silence, because it usually takes people quite a while to decide to process that. And I'm a processor, so I get that. To process that question and really think of an answer. So, but wonderful things come up in that. And it's so exciting to watch somebody come in on week 1 who thought, I'm not even sure I want to be here. And if they stick it out, to see them progress even in 13 weeks. Now, your grief isn't over in 13 weeks, but you have learned a lot about yourself, a lot about grief, about that you're not going crazy, and you have been exposed to a lot of tools to help you.
Some tools in your toolbox.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that the friends and family that I know that have gone through it have seen Grief Share be very helpful for them.
Yes.
And almost to help them recognize when grief kind of pops up. And because we all know the journey of grief, like you said, there is no timetable. And sometimes you think, hey, I'm doing so much better. And then something happens and boom, you're right back in it.
And sometimes you feel like you're back. Geez, I'm back on day 1. It's been 2 years. I thought I was farther along than this, and you are. But we get ambushed with certain things.
Yeah.
And there's certain triggers, and it's good. And Grief Share asks you in some of these reflective questions to identify, if you can, some of those events or triggers that are going to take you back to that place so that you're not caught off guard as often.
Yeah. My best friend and I, we have, sometimes we will exchange texts about moments of ambush grief.
Yes.
And it's, just to let someone else know about it, someone else that knows that that's coming.
Yes.
And so here's my ambush grief story of the day. This was fun. I'm crying, going to pick up my kids from school, or,
Right.
whatever the situation may be. Why, I know you kind of just explained Grief Share for us. Why was that so important to you?
Well, you asked another question in there earlier than this about how did I get into Grief Share? And that's kind of an interesting question for me. I'm in another ministry at my church called Soul Care, and I had walked with several women whose husbands had committed suicide or child. And I went with them to Grief Share.
Okay.
Which, by the way, is a great thing for a friend or someone close to somebody who's grieving to do, because most of us have no idea what that person is going through, and we just see them in pain and we want it to be over, and we say things that we regret and that aren't helpful, and we don't understand what they're going through. And so we've had people come alongside just as friends or relatives, but not as close as the one who is grieving the most, just so that you can be a support system to that person and not a detriment. Interestingly enough, I had no intention of doing this going into it, but God just ministered to me. And I had mentioned that I had a daughter who was disabled, and there's a tremendous amount of grief with that. At the beginning, you're grieving the child. If you are smart, you're grieving the child that you didn't get. At the same time, you're learning about and learning to love the child that you have.
Yeah.
And that those two emotions can actually walk down the road together. But if you don't know that, it can cause a lot of turmoil inside of you. Yeah.
Almost guilt, I would assume.
Guilt and just confusion. You can't even identify it really unless someone helps you. So as I went through this program, each week I thought, wow, there's a lot of emotions that one thing, I was so busy taking care of her. She had respiratory issues. So, and going to doctors and going to therapists and going to everything, I didn't even have time to grieve. I didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
Because I was busy. And she never slept all night. She never slept for more than 2 hours at a time until she was 5. So,
and I think that's an issue for a lot of moms, and is that we don't really feel like we have time to grieve.
Right.
Because we have to help our families grieve. If you're grieving the loss of a parent, you might be spending most of your energy helping your, mom or dad that is still alive.
Right.
Helping them out, helping make sure they're grieving in a healthy way. And so we kind of push down that grief so that we can help other people around us.
And honestly, those other things, they're day to day coming at us. And so we don't even think about that we're repressing grief or whatever.
Right.
We're just doing what's facing us.
Yeah.
But we get a lot of people in Grief Share who, somebody that was just in my Christmas program, Surviving the Holidays, his mother died last January or February. And as he watched this, he realized that he was one of those people. He was the executor of her estate. His siblings live all over the country. And all he had done was just fly around and try to take care of all these details. And he really had not grieved. And so that is very common. Many wives. I have another very dear friend at church. Her husband passed away, and they're from a generation where the husband did all the banking, all the bill paying, all of the putting gas in the car, doing all of those things. And when he passed away, she didn't even know where their banking was being done.
Yeah.
So her first year was spent just learning to navigate life so she could keep on keeping on. And grief she didn't have time for grief until like year 2.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting.
It is.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned Surviving the Holidays.
Yes.
Which I love that name.
Yes.
Because I think it's a nod to the fact that, like, there is a little bit of survival in it, right? And we're recognizing the difficulties, because grief, you can even be what you feel is a really good place, and then the holidays come, and grief just can really bubble to the surface.
Yes.
So, tell us about the ways that the holidays can affect grief differently.
Well, for one thing, and this is the video makes this very clear, is they're going to be hard.
Mm.
So don't be surprised by that. Expect that. The holidays are filled with tradition. They're filled with activities that have, your husband may have been the one who went and bought the Christmas tree or who set it up and now he's gone. What am I going to do? I mean, there's family gatherings and maybe you were the gathering place.
Yeah.
And you think about that now and there's absolutely no way that you could think about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be hard.
Yeah.
So if you kind of expect that, then there's some things you can do. One of them is to, is that what you want me to tell you?
Yes, absolutely. Did you just realize you're like, wait a minute?
Yes.
Getting ahead. No, I mean, I'm sure that because you mentioned grief shares about tools, right? And it's about giving us tools to survive, or tools to, recognize grief, be able to, is the word combat it? I don't feel like that's the...
Well, they use the word navigate.
Navigate, that's a better word.
I think that's, I don't think we're really in a war with grief because grief is really on our side and we're on grief's side.
And I feel like a war means someone's going to win.
And someone's going to lose. Well, there's a lot of different things going through my mind right now, but one of the presenters in the Grief Share program is Paul David Tripp. And he's an author and a counselor, and he's one of my favorites. I knew about him before Grief Share, but and he said, I believe it's him that said in this Christmas video, Christmas is the survivor's holiday. And I thought about that for a long time, and that impacted me tremendously because God knows we're suffering whether we have grief or not. I mean, life is grieving. And yet he sent Jesus to give us hope. And that's the other thing about Grief Share. It is, some people go, oh, wow, isn't that depressing? And I'm like, it could be, but we are really offering hope. Yes, you're going to feel all these things. Yes, this is going to be hard. Yes, you're going to be ambushed when you're not even thinking about that person. But there's hope.
Yeah.
And that's what we are offering in the end. And I just love that it's a different way to look at Christmas. If you're in the middle of grieving, it is, God is there and he provided a lifeboat for us to survive life in general, but also it came at Christmas, and that's what we celebrate.
And when we observe Advent, you and I talked about this earlier, we observe these themes of hope, peace, joy, love, all things that can be, I don't know, feel so far away sometimes when we're in the middle of grief. So I love that idea that here we have the story of Christ and this baby coming, the Messiah, and how that provides for us, once again, a way to navigate through grief with hope, navigate through grief with joy, with love.
Yes.
Yeah. My question is, when we have these moments, right, that are going to pop up in the holidays, they're going to pop up the rest of the year too, but how do we honor our grief? And what I mean by that is, like you said, some people will say nice things like, you just need to get over it. You just need to stop crying. You just need to blah, 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 whatever it is. So is the right thing to kind of subdue it until you can be alone in a room to deal with it? Or is it to handle it right then and there? Or how do we honor that without shoving it in a box and closing the lid?
Well, people say the darndest things. And as I explained to my grief share groups, it seems like a conundrum that us, the ones that are grieving, are the ones that need to make it easier for those that aren't grieving and sort of help them. We need to forgive them and recognize that they mean well. We need to let them off of the hook. They don't know how we feel. They can't know how we feel, because if they were going through, let's say you lost your husband, and let's say they lost their husband, their relationship with their husbands was different. Who they are is different.
Yeah.
What they bring, their own personal resources they bring to that experience is different. You may have been married to the greatest guy in the whole wide world, and your friend was married to somebody who didn't treat her very well. So she has a whole different grief journey than you do.
Yeah.
And so we end up, the ones that are on the journey of being the ones that need to forgive people, assume the best about everybody. They want to help. But they simply don't know what to say. And remember that you yourself has probably at one time or another said something really stupid, right?
Right.
I'm guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I remember with my daughter, I lived here. All my family's out in California. They only saw us periodically. And of course, they were heartbroken for me and for Mandy, and they said the darndest things. You know, like, I just pray that one of these times that she's in the hospital, that God just takes her home. Well, she was my daughter. I loved her just as much as any parent loves their child. And I'm not you're not praying that God comes and takes one of your kids home, are you? Yeah. So,
Yeah. No.
So you just that's one of the things about honoring your grief, is acknowledging and learning to be okay with the fact that nobody can really understand. And that's why we have Jesus. He is a friend closer than a brother. And he is the only one. And I came to a point of letting my whole family off the hook. And Jesus became my best friend. And her dad left, so it was me and Mandy and Jesus. And I had just moved to the Valley, so I didn't have a church home and I didn't have friends here. So it really was me and Mandy and Jesus. But I found out that Jesus is enough. And so through all of this, and I think most people who are believers already find that their relationship with the Lord grows tremendously. Especially women who've had, their husbands passed away, and now they don't have that covering or that leadership or that person who's taking that responsibility for your spiritual growth or whatever. And now it's just them and Jesus. And you grow in that situation. The other thing about honoring your grief is, and you asked, should we do something right now or wait? I think we all, no matter what's going on in life, have people that we trust, that we can share most anything with, and we know that they are going to point us in the right direction, that they're good listeners and whatever. So you want to pick and choose who it is that you share your greatest emotions with, I suppose, or what you're struggling with. And it's kind of an interesting path to walk, because you're not going to just come up and, if somebody comes up and says, well, how are you doing? But you barely know them. You're not going to unload on them.
Correct.
And that's good for you and for them. And people think, well, I'm just having to be fake. I don't think that's really the case, because just in life in general, we pick and choose who it is that we're going to be more vulnerable with. And so it's the same thing in grief. However, if you don't acknowledge grief, it will come and get you, because it's a very strong emotion, and you can push it down. You can be too busy for it, but eventually you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So
it's not about pushing it down. It's not about hiding it.
right.
It might be about choosing the location and the people
Yes.
with which you really open up.
Yes.
And I think that makes sense because you're going to get the best help there. If you're just and I'm sure there's going to be moments, we talked about ambush grief, where we are not ready for it and it hits us. I was at the fries counter getting pizza dough, because we make our own pizza, but our local grocery store has like ready-made rising pizza dough.
Right.
That's all I needed. And I asked the lady, and she had tears in her eyes. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She was like apologizing to me. I'm like, please don't apologize. Are you okay? She's like, yes, I just had a friend pass away, and I saw something and it just reminded me of him and it just hit me. And I was like, oh, ambush grief. I get it.
Yes.
I get it. I'm right there with you. And so, I'm a stranger, but that's all she needed to tell me.
Right.
She didn't need to like pour out her heart,
Right.
tell me everything about her friend. I mean, I probably would have sat and listened. But then, just to explain that and to move on, but then to go and find that trusted person to say, like my friend that I text and I say, this was an ambush grief moment. Why? What was it about this moment that was so hard for you? And talking about it, I think, helps the next time a moment like that comes up.
Right.
Because we can kind of expect
and even you witnessing this lady, and if you hadn't experienced the recent grief that you had,
yeah,
you would. It's informative. If we're paying attention, that wow. So that's how that works. That's how grief works.
Yeah. It
just comes and gets you. I know you can be going down the aisle at the grocery store and your eyes fall on your husband's favorite cereal. And boom, you weren't even thinking about him.
Yeah.
It was the last thing on your mind. But yeah, those things happen.
What would you say to someone who is listening to this going, okay, Marian, I hear you saying that in your time of grief, it was you and your daughter and Jesus, but they can't remember the last time that they talked to Jesus, or, church or faith is not something that they, prescribe to. What would you say to them in their time of grief?
Well, that is an interesting question. A lot of times, trauma or crises that happen in our life cause us to think about those questions. Why am I here? What is life all about? I thought that everything was this, and this, and that has completely disappeared or turned upside down, and I don't have the answers to those things anymore. And so it can be a time that people who perhaps maybe grew up in the church as a child and know some things, but aren't presently involved in a church, it brings them back. And they are coming to a church most often around the valley. This is offered through churches. They have somehow gotten on the church property and they're coming to church, and they're hearing a lot of references to God's word, what he says about us, what he says about himself. And so I think it causes some people to begin thinking, and we're there to offer and provide hope for them, and to help them find where they can get hope, where they can find hope.
Yeah. I think that's really important.
Yeah. You don't have to be a believer to come to Grief Share, and I think you'll still get some great tools.
Yeah.
But the real hope, because God offers hope beyond this life, and that is hopeful.
Well,
so we don't, but we're not there evangelizing. But if people have an interest and they're asking questions, hopefully we're there to build a relationship where they feel they can ask those questions, and we will give them answers from what God says. This
Yeah.
is very biblically based, and we're not off on a lot of opinions and that kind of thing in the program
Yeah.
itself.
So let's go back to the holidays.
Yes.
And circling back to that, do you have any tools that you might offer us as we are
Yes.
looking forward to the holidays to help us, quote unquote, survive the
Yes.
holidays, things that we might want to avoid or things that we might want to do ahead of time?
One of the first things that you can do as you think about this season ahead is write down everything that you normally have done. All the traditions, where you eat, when you decorate, how you decorate, who decorates, what music programs you go to, everything that you can think of that is your holiday tradition from Thanksgiving on through the first of the year. And look those over and go, okay, this one has to stay. This one I can't do this year. I'll revisit it next year. And this one I never liked. It was somebody else's idea, and I don't ever have to do this again. And it's fun. In the video, there's a man who's just a regular person like us, and he says, my wife always wanted a fresh Christmas tree, and he said, I hated it. I hated having to put those lights on and off every year. And the first couple years after she was gone, I couldn't even think about a Christmas tree. But this is the year 3, and I went and bought myself an artificial tree. It had the lights on it. The grandkids came over and decorated it, and I put it up every year, and I love it. So there's a lot of things that we do because other people like them. If they're not in our wheelhouse, we don't have to do them. So I think
it's not dishonoring them by not doing it.
Not at all. I think, and that whole dishonoring is, wow, we love to heap guilt on ourselves, don't we?
Yeah.
Like if I laugh or have a good time at the holidays, I am somehow dishonoring this person. But everybody goes through that. You just have to have a good stern talk with yourself and go, is that really true? You can't stay in the most deepest part of grief very long. I mean, we're not built to live that way, where we are just going to be ravenously sad and morose for the rest of our lives. We can't even do that.
Yeah.
So, and certainly God doesn't want us to do that. And so that's one thing you can do. And if you can't do everything this year, or if you're the one that's always had Thanksgiving dinner and you can't do it this year, you're just not up for that, then make sure everybody knows. Or maybe you've cooked the whole meal every year and you can't do that this year. Well, then have everybody bring something.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of ways to be creative and not feel like you have to do it the way that it's always been done.
Yeah.
That may not work. So that's one thing. Make a list. The second thing is plan for social gatherings. So whether it's church, whether it's going to a family, whether it's going to a Christmas party with your Sunday school class, whatever it is, if you get invited and you say to the hostess that invites you, today I could just give you an overwhelming yes. But tomorrow, if you asked me, I would go, there ain't no way. So ask the hostess if she can just leave an open hand for you. And, your desire is to come, but when that day comes, I may not be able to do it. And let yourself off of the hook. And that way she knows. And that way you're free to be who you are and not have to go and pretend or fall apart if you think that's what you're going to do. None of us want to do that in a group. The other thing is go by yourself. in your own vehicle. Now that sort of seems
Interesting.
counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
However, you may be there even at a family gathering for an hour and you go, okay, I'm done. I have to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
If you've come with somebody and you're dependent on a ride home,
Huh.
you are in a pickle. So while you may, if you go to a party or a gathering, meet up with somebody there that'll sort of be your sidekick and your blocker for all the things that people will be coming at you.
Uh-huh.
To get there, go by yourself because then you can leave.
That's really smart.
Things we wouldn't think about. And like I said, that's sort of counterintuitive. You think, well, it would be good to go with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But that does obligate you then to be doing whatever they're doing. And sometimes you just can't do that.
Yeah.
So those, I think, are good tools
Yeah.
to have in your toolbox. And if you can't go to everything, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways you honor your grief is to respect it. And it, you're not the same. You're not the same person you were before all this happened. So you can't, it doesn't mean you're worse. And it doesn't mean that it won't change in the next year or 5 years or whatever. But right now, in the first year, especially when you're going through all those firsts, you have no idea how you're going to respond, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, and even going to church, one of the things Grief Share says, not even just about the holidays, is if you and your husband always sat down near the front, and the thought of doing that is like, I can't do that. Sit in the back row, and where you can get out if you need to. So protect yourself.
Yeah.
And give space for yourself to deal with whatever you're dealing with at the time.
I know for me, I didn't really like to sit with people after Mom died because the music always made me cry.
Right.
And
And
pride
then,
thing or
you
not,
know,
I don't really like people to like see me cry, and then I'm like, then you're gonna feel bad for me, and then you're gonna feel like you need to like put your
say
arm around me.
something,
Yeah.
and
I'm like, really, I'm fine. It's just that the music, even last Sunday, one of the, you were in the choir, you guys were singing something, and the words just really hit me, and
Yes.
and you guys were singing, "Holy, holy, holy is Lord God Almighty."
The Revelation song.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that is a verse that we read when Mom, when we were reading scripture before Mom passed. And part of that, what we talked about was that soon, very soon, she would be singing with the angels in heaven. And that
Yes.
scripture says that is what the angels will be singing,
Yes.
right? So I rarely can get through a song that has those words in it without crying, because I think, hey, Mom's singing those right now, you know? And so I know that's one of the things as far as church. I was like, I'm just going to
That's why
sit
you
with my
sit
husband.
in the back.
No, I sit in the back because my husband likes to sit in the back.
Yeah.
So I like those tools. I think that they're really helpful. And what I hear you saying is that we need to understand that it doesn't matter how long we've been grieving. The holidays are going to kind of bring up that grief anew.
They are. And be willing, I guess, because your family or whatever the arrangement is, it's different than it was. New traditions are okay, and you're going to make some new traditions. And that's okay. Your dad is coming.
Yeah.
Is he going to be here for Christmas too?
No.
Or just Thanksgiving?
Just Thanksgiving.
Whatever went on at Thanksgiving before, it's going to be a little bit different for him and for all of you if Thanksgiving is a time that you typically got together and shared family. So sometimes new traditions just sort of occur by accident, and other times it's more intentional that you go, okay, well, that's what we did when Mom was here, but right now, nothing's forever. Right now, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
Let's do something else.
Yeah.
And be okay with that, and let other people be okay wherever they are.
Yeah.
There is no timeline on grief, and I can tell you from the people that come to Grief Share, some of them, as a matter of fact, one of the gals that's one of my table leaders and helps me a lot, who I love, also a choir member, her husband died about 15 years ago. And she came to Grief Share the first time that I did it at church, which was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And because she realized at the prompting of her daughters that she was stuck. And that's one of the topics we talk about, because you can get stuck at a certain place. And that's not good. We need to move past that. And so they give you some tools on how to recognize if you're stuck and what you need to do to keep on keeping on. However, there's no timeline on when you should be done with this process. And there's no guarantee that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, something will come up that will make you cry. Now, I think over the years, those tears mean different things. They're not like the tears on the first day necessarily. But we don't just forget people that have been in we don't forget our moms ever.
Yeah.
So, and there's, in our culture, unfortunately, we don't grieve very well as an American culture. Other countries do it much better, I think, especially third world countries.
Yeah.
They're not so sophisticated. We're like, you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, keep it together, you're strong, you can do this. Other countries, I mean, they give you wail.
Yeah.
Right? And you wear black, or you
enter a time
a
period of mourning. Yes.
Our time of mourning is like the funeral's over, they're in the grave, done. Even though that's no one's experience.
Yeah.
And you just have to learn, like, wow. And for people who are grieving somebody serious for the first time, that's news to them too, because they were one of those ones that thought, wow, this shouldn't last this long.
Yeah.
My dad would fall into that category. There was someone at his church, this has been a few years ago, whose husband died, and they'd been married for like 68 years. And a year later, she was still crying, and he was just, not to her face, I hope, but just reading her to us, because we happened to be out there, the riot act, like, what's wrong with her? Her husband's dead, He died and he went to heaven. He's in a better place. Get over it. Now, after being married 68 years, his wife died. Wow. And he can still cry. And that was 9 years ago.
Yeah.
So our own personal experience helps educate us a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah. What about, okay, so we're talking about how you don't want to say something dumb, right? You're talking about your dad having that experience. So what advice can you give to those of us that are walking alongside someone who is grieving? Maybe we're grieving with them. Maybe we didn't experience that grief. We're just walking with them.
Be a good listener and say very little. Just be there. Just be there. And I mean, most of the time when you get right down to it, if you think about it, there are no words.
Yeah.
You can't fix it. You could say, I'm sorry. The person's heard that however many hundreds of times. And it's not that it doesn't have meaning, but sometimes it isn't necessary. Your presence is just tremendously valuable. If you think about yourself and you're going through a hard time, somebody's presence you don't even have to talk about any of this stuff. Yeah. Even when I was walking through, especially my daughter's first few years, and I had, like I said, no family or friends here. So all the doctor appointments where I was getting, well, she'll never be this. You should put her in an institution. She's never going to walk. She's never going to, and she's only this big. And I'm like, how do you know that? And all the way home, I'm bawling my eyes out. There was nothing anybody sitting in the passenger seat could have said, but it would have been comforting to have someone there.
Yeah.
So I think that we feel compelled to fix it. we feel compelled to say something, especially if we are believers. We think we should like quote the Bible and say some really astounding, profound thing.
Mm.
And there really are no words.
Yeah.
So, and another thing that we in Grief Share, there's a lot of help on helping you help others communicate with you. One of the things that is suggested is that even at this time of year, and it was in the Surviving the Holidays, if you're working or if you're in any kind of a group that you're going to be with, write a letter. This is where I'm at. I have no idea. Thanksgiving's coming up. This is when Mom died. I have no idea how I'm going to feel. It may be a good day for me. It may not. I have my good days and my bad days, but tell people where you're at so that they don't have to ask, how are you doing? Because
that's a hard question.
That's a hard question to ask, a hard one to answer. And if you're at work and the holidays are coming, just let people know that this is a tough time for you. You don't need to talk about it, but if you see me crying, don't be disturbed. Whatever it is you need to say to whatever group it is, but that can be very helpful and has been to several people in Grief Share, whether it was to other family members or to a group that they work with or whatever, I think people, like, I would appreciate that if I got a letter like that. The other thing is people want to know, they want to help, right?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, just call me if you need anything. Well, you're never going to call, and because it's just out there somewhere. So if you can be thinking about what is it that I need? If I'm a new widow, do I need somebody to come and do my yard work? Do I need somebody to, cut the grass? Or where could I use some help? And have those up here.
And recognizing it's okay to ask for help.
Especially when people are asking you. If you have something that they're thrilled because now they know they're going to do something that you actually want and need, as opposed to them having to, well, I guess I could take some meals over tonight. Of course, she has 14 of them in the freezer and doesn't really need any more. So those kinds of things, to be prepared with some things that you can say to people that you cannot take care of. Maybe if you're older, it could be technology things that you have, this is not working. Maybe it's something that you need help with, like financially. Not that you need money, but you need help in figuring out some things financially. So if there's some areas that you're having to struggle with, have a list of those somewhere close by that you can pull out and go,
Or even things that maybe even you can do. You're not going to struggle with it, but it's not something you want to spend your time on right now while you're dealing with other things. Like,
absolutely.
For my dad, he had someone who came and cleaned his house.
Yes.
He has never had anyone clean his house.
Right.
But he's like, for right now, that's what I need.
Yes.
And he's like, I do my own laundry. And he set his own schedule up, and I think sometimes it can be really hard. I personally have a really hard time asking for help. And so making that list makes it so that, number one, you don't have to come up with it off the top of your head, but then also you can say, okay, this is not me giving up.
Right.
This is me allowing, because when other people help us, it blesses them as well.
Absolutely. You're robbing people of a blessing and a joy. And we are meant to live in community. And I know you would be the first to help someone else and count it all joy, right?
Yeah.
So we have to let people do that to us. And when we're in these crises or these difficult times, that's probably one of the most important lessons that I learned with Mandy. I had no resources. I had used that myself. And and I need help. I need people. We're built for community, and we need community.
So tell me, when you get to that point where you're like, I need help, how do you know if the help you need it? I'm asking you the same question I asked you at lunch that day. Do I need counseling? How do you know if the help you need is something like grief share, or if it's something more extreme, like I should go and find counseling or therapy or something like that?
Well, I'm assuming that anybody that would ask me that would have some marginal relationship with me or whoever they're asking. And I would know something about them. But I would tell them, here's what you do at Grief Share, and somewhere in there, when is the right time to come? There is no right time. I think you can come too early, too soon after something's happened. Don't let me forget to get back to the question you asked.
Okay.
You can come too soon because you're in a fog.
Yeah.
You're in shock, literally.
Yeah.
And all this information is coming at you, and you're like, no, I can't do this right now. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We had one lady in this 2 Sundays ago, a week ago Sunday, her husband or her boyfriend, who she was engaged to, had been killed in a terrible traffic accident out around Wickenburg 2 days prior to that. And someone had, at Crisis Pregnancy Center, had suggested Grief Share. And she came. Now, we were able to she listened to everything, but she got some additional information because Pastor Mark was there. Between him and me and Mark's wife, she got a lot of prayer, and maybe that's all that God wanted for her that night. I don't know. We offered her a lot of other things to come back to the church, and we would help out.
Yeah.
So, and maybe by January, when we'll be offering Grief Share again, the full program, she would be ready for that. But it's really different for everybody. And so there is no time that is perfect. It's whenever you feel. And so your question was, what if they need counseling? And
how do you know if you need counseling?
Well, that's my job as the facilitator.
Okay.
And my table leaders is to listen carefully, and not only to what's being said right there, but a lot of our best times are after it's over and people mill around and talk with people they've met at their table, or they've had similar experiences or whatever. So a lot happens there. But one of the things we do is that we have, and this is a Grief Share International, their program, they have a card that we get their name and address and all that stuff. And then there's a thing that they sign down there which says, your facilitator is not a counselor. If you need counseling, we will be happy to give you some referrals to go, but they are not counselors, and you are recognizing that by signing your name. So you're not holding them to that standard. However, I am very sensitive to what people are saying and what their body language is, their overall demeanor, and my table leaders are. And so we want to try to pick up on that if they sometimes. And another thing we have to assess for is suicide. One of the first things people do when somebody dies, many people, is they want to die too. Now, and in the program, it tells you that feeling like, and one of the gals who's a very renowned counselor, when her husband died, and he had been sick for a long time with a brain tumor, when he passed away, she was ready to die, but she had not made any plans to make that happen. And she makes a distinction between, yes, I'm ready to go too, and I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I have to join them, and this is what I'm going to do. So you just have to learn to listen, and we do assess for suicide and for people who might need counseling, and the church has, as you know, has a very large list of people that we can refer to.
So it would be more like so the first thing to do is maybe find a group like Grief Share in your area, and then go there.
Go there, and see if that answers some
Yeah.
of your questions, and if you see that, wow, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
This is a normal process.
Mm-hmm. Might make you feel like, oh, maybe I don't need counseling. I just need some help at identifying grief. And
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, doing the workbook is extremely, like I said, that's where you do your own personal journey, because there you have to answer questions about you.
Yeah.
And where you're at and what you're feeling. And
Yeah.
so.
Well, there's a question that we ask at the end of every podcast, and that is because here on the Journey of Ruth, we feel like we're not supposed to walk alone. Just like you've said, we are not even created for that.
Right.
Who is it that has helped you along in your journey?
Wow. I have been fortunate, not at the very beginning, for instance, of my journey with my daughter, but shortly after that, when she was maybe 6 or 7. I was in a small group at a local church here, and it was a lot of small groups don't make it. This group was, to me, it was like, this is church. This is the first time I've ever been in church. And we came alongside one another and loved on each other. And of course, Mandy, one of the things that if you have a child with a disability, you're pretty isolated because your typical babysitters can't come and watch this person. So she went with me everywhere. So she was part of the small group too. So everybody knew her. But I met some people there that I'm still extremely close to. They've moved several times around the United States, but right now they're just outside of Denver. So when I came to Palmcroft about 20 years ago, about 25 years ago, Mandy was coming with me. But just in my own personal life and growth in general, one of the unfortunate things about, unfortunate is just life, but when I came to Palmcroft really and we joined was about 1999. And in 1998 is where Mandy and she kicked me out of the house. So after that, we had given her the van that we had, and we didn't have that anymore. So I couldn't take her all the places I had taken her, including going to my family, which has been one of my greatest griefs. If I go out to California to spend Christmas with my family out there, I have no way to get her out there. So that is hard on my heart because she loves family. But and so since I came to Palmcroft, she and I have been living in 2 different houses, and all my closest friends and my dears that have gotten me just through life in general and have been my mentors and my dear friends really don't know Mandy. And that I was just having that discussion with somebody. And that is a real heartache for me because here I am at this time in my life for the first time, really. Because she's not in my life, which is not, I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I mean, I'm just saying that's the fact. And so I've been able to do more ministry and do things that I couldn't do when she was living with me. And so all the people, including yourself, have you ever met Mandy?
I have not.
Yep. She comes to church sometimes, but I'm very fortunate that most of the staff at her house are refugees from Africa who've been sponsored by churches, and they're in this country, and they're believers. And so she goes to church with whoever is working. That's very cool. And she comes to special events at our church. But all my dears now really don't know anything about my life before coming to Palmcroft. And that's when God got a hold of me and really did his greatest works. So, but people like you, Maggie, if I can mention names, and just opportunities that, and there's others on that list too, who have listened to me. Another one that was very important, and it's actually why I ended up coming to Palmcroft, is Jill Rhodes.
Oh, yeah.
And that was in the mid-90s. She was teaching a Bible study there, and I came, and then we became close friends. And she is a great listener, and she has tremendous compassion and mercy and all of those things that make you feel valued wherever you are in your journey.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, we went to Ukraine twice together. And so she's been a very important part of this process for me. If she's listening to this, which she may well be out of all these people, I have told her that, but probably not recently.
Well, I love that even though there was a time in your life where you felt like you didn't have as many people around you, God has placed people in your life to support you. And I think that's beautiful. Yes. If people want to find out information about Grief Share, where can they go?
You can go to griefshare.org.
Okay.
And you'll find a ton of information there. And I don't know what button you click on, but there's one that tells you locations.
Oh, good.
And it will tell you a location. You put in a city, it'll tell you every place that Grief Share is being offered. Fabulous. And the date. Of course, the church has to put that in, but we do.
Yeah.
And so you can find out the one nearest you or whatever. And that's one way.
That's cool.
There are grief shares going on. I live in Sun City, and there's a lot of grief share programs out there, almost at every church at some time during the year.
Yeah.
And it's on their light board or billboard or something.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
People call the church and want to know. We get a lot of folks who don't go to our church just because when they wanted to go through grief share, this is when our church is sponsoring it. And so that's one way. That you asked me how they would find out about.
Yeah, just if they could go to
in general.
Yeah, if that makes sense, they can just go to their website and look for that information. And I think that's great. Well, thank you for everything that you shared with us today. Thank you for your practical tips. Hopefully, people are encouraged to know that they're not alone in this, and that even if it's hard this season, that it's a process, and that it's okay for it to not be okay.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people that are grieving have to come to terms with. It's okay for it not to be okay.
Yeah.
And just let themselves off of the hook and everybody else.
Yeah.
And,
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.